Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Van Buren Variety Show. I'm Bob Van Buren, your host. Glad you could join us. As you know, on this show, every week we have a different guest, a different topic. So you never know what you're in for. It could be special interest, could be a hobby, could be entertainment. But anyway, we're glad you're here. Hope you've had a great week so far. I actually have. I went down memory lane over the weekend. You know, parents and grandparents, they're known for keeping selected things from your past. And so my mother has some things that she saved for when I was a little child. I know when the T-Rexes roamed the earth, right? So anyway, so I found something and I was like, wow, I have not seen this in probably 40 years or more. Got that as a little Christmas gift some Christmas when I was little. And man, that brings back memories. I used to play with that over and over and over. It looks like a little guy speeding down this little roadster, I guess you could say. So it's been played with, so it actually has seen better days. But wow, you never know what keepsakes will bring some good memories back. So hopefully your parents and grandparents have saved something for you too. So yeah, I'm just a kid at heart. I've been playing with it too. So there's my blast from the past. So hope everybody else has had a great week. It's been a lot of rain down here where I'm at. So hopefully you're high and dry where you're at, or you might be flooded kind of in Texas where I'm at right now. So hope the weather's working out for you now. Tonight, our topic is comedy, and it's one of my favorite subjects. I mean, we all, despite all the problems in the world, the politics, the wars, just everybody fighting, we need some comic relief. For me personally, I've got to get away from it just for all the news and the bad weather and again, politics and just, everybody at each other's throats. So we need that outlet just to get away from our problems for a while and just forget about everything in the world and just have some fun. So I have a very special guest tonight. His name is Shaun Eli, and he is a stand-up comedian. And I've checked out his website, and I'm going to give you a link to the website tonight so you can check it out yourself and see what an entertainer and how talented he is. So let me bring him up now.
Yes, here I am.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Shaun Eli. Shaun, welcome to the Van Buren Variety Show.
Thanks. You've got the whole world behind you. I just have a bunch of books and a couple of printers.
I got the whole world in my hands. Is that what they're saying?
Hey, you're blocking Ireland. Move out of the way.
There it is. Yeah. Well, right there. There it is. There's Ireland. Well, that's Northern Ireland. Oh, there's Ireland right there. I'll try to duck next time.
Yeah.
But no, I'm glad you're here. I guess the first thing I would want to ask is what got you interested in being a comedian, going into comedy?
A woman talked me into trying it. Why does any man do anything?
Oh, that's true. So what's the story on that?
All right. I was on a date and I'd been writing jokes. I always wrote down things I thought were funny. And I started submitting jokes freelance to the Tonight Show when Jay Leno took over the Tonight Show. And I was on a date, and I think I might have mentioned this to my date. And she said, well, you're funny. Why don't you try stand-up? And I said, I'm not a performer. I'd had friends who were actors, and the last thing I ever wanted to do was be in front of an audience. And she said,
really?
hey, I had no interest. And then she said, I took this comedy class. Why don't you come see my class perform? And they were funnier than I thought they'd be. And she said, take the class. And I took the class and started performing. And 6 years later, I said, you know what? I don't need my day job anymore.
Wow. So you leave your job altogether and do this, full time.
I make less money, but I am way happier.
But Shaun, I've often heard that as long as you enjoy what you're doing, it's really not a job. I mean, is that true in your case too?
I would say, depending on how you look at it, I like writing jokes. I like performing. It's fun being in front of an audience. It's fun even just answering the audience's questions after a show, meeting people. Traveling's not bad. The business part of it isn't fun because entertainment is 90% rejection and 10% performing.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Well, you think of an actor. An actor goes to audition and almost never gets the part. It's much harder being an actor because you get rejected to your face. I just send emails and people don't respond, so that's a rejection.
That's true. Well, I can kind of relate. Backstory, years and years ago, I was in community theater. And so there's been some parts that I just, you know what, I really want that role, whether it was a comedy or drama, and they go with actor over here, and you know, so yeah, I know the rejection. So yeah, it's kind of comes with the territory.
It's probably even worse for models because your whole life you're told you're the prettiest thing ever, and then you show up and everybody looks just like you, and you're like, well how did this happen?
Oh, that's true. Oh, wow. So as far as comedy, you mentioned Jay Leno earlier. Can you tell us more about that?
I got lucky. This is back, before the internet pretty much. He got the Tonight Show, and I would turn on the TV and I would see, I'd read the newspaper in the morning and I'd think of funny things based on current events. And then I'd turn on the TV at night and he'd be telling the same joke. And I'd say, well, obviously my jokes fit his monologue. And I called and said, hey, I'm a freelance writer in New York, and I would love to write jokes for your show. And I spoke to somebody for a while, and they eventually sent me their fax number, and I started faxing in jokes.
You said fax number. That's been quite a while, too.
You want to hear the creepy thing? I still remember his fax number. I have dialed it more than any other number I've dialed in my life.
Wow. Well, that's a good thing then.
Yeah. Well, every day I worked at a bank, and every day, I have a newspaper full of scribbles, and I'd sit down at my desk and I'd open a word processor and I'd type in the jokes, and I would print it, take it over to the fax machine and send it in. And sometimes they told my jokes.
That's awesome. And that's truly an honor.
You know what's weird? The first joke I ever, give you a little bit of backstory. You probably remember this. Sinead O'Connor went on Saturday Night Live with a picture of the Pope, said fight the power, tore the picture of the Pope up.
Yeah, so I remember that.
That just was, it was just in the news a couple of days ago. For some reason, she was in the news and they were talking about that. And the first joke I ever sold was, the next week atheists are going on Saturday Night Live and ripping up blank sheets of paper. It's a dumb little joke, but it was the first joke I ever sold.
I laughed. I thought it was funny. Well, let me ask you this, Shaun. In your career as a comedian, as a writer of comedy, what do you say do you like the most? What's the most enjoyable thing in your career?
I think the best thing about stand-up comedy, at least for me, is thinking of a joke on the way to a gig. And sometimes I'll even pull over and, write it down because it's fresh in my head and I don't want to forget it. But thinking of something on the way to a show, and they tell comics, don't ever open with a new joke, don't ever close with a new joke, because you never know how it's going to work. But for me, to just rush out on stage and try the first, the thing I thought of when I'm so energetic about it because I just thought of it and I really want to see how it goes. And when that works, that's the best thing about stand-up comedy.
I can relate. Like I said, I was in theater for a while, and just when I was in comedy, the audience laughter just gave me that much more energy. Even though, where I was scripted, I had to follow the script. So I can only imagine how much more magnified it is with you when you write your own material and the audience is just roaring with laughter. I'm sure that's just like energizes you.
That's the best thing and the worst thing about stand-up comedy is the fact that I'm the writer, the performer, the director, the stage manager, sometimes the sound and lighting guy, the wardrobe person. In my case, I'm also the web designer, the publicity director.
You're everything.
Yeah.
Wow.
but just to write a joke and try it out. And a close second, I think, is when something happens in the audience or I'm talking to the audience. We call it crowd work, where you just say to the audience, where are you from? What do you do? And build something from there. And one of the things I do when I do a show at a comedy club is no matter when my spot in the show is, I try to get there at the beginning to see the MC talk to the audience and see what things, because they usually start a show by asking questions. And once I was at Broadway Comedy Club and I went to the MC and I think I was late and I said to him, tell me about the audience. And he said, well, there's a dentist over there, and the front row has 3 people from Latvia. And I told him, the MC said, I told him he would have no Latvian jokes. So I go on stage and I say, I was told the MC said he had no Latvian jokes. That is not true. I speak fluent Latvian, which is, of course, a lie. Yeah. But I have Latvian friends, so I know how to say 2 things in Latvian. Sorry, 3 things. So I say, I have a Latvian joke. And I say, Zirks, Katya, Paul Diaz, and they burst out laughing. And so if the audience wants to know what I said, that was very short, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. I say, okay, you want to know what I said? I said, horse, cat, thank you. That's all I knew how to say. But it was so stupid. The Latvians liked it.
That's all was funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of answers my next question. Well, actually, one of the questions I had is, well, before I get into that, would you say you're more stand-up comedian or corporate comedian or a mixture of both? What would you say?
Well, I don't know how they differ. I mean, it's like saying, are you a dentist or a tooth guy? I mean, corporate comedian is a stand-up comedian who performs in front of corporate people. So that's some of what I do. Some of what I do is performing in theaters, sometimes at charity events. I'd say to people I've headlined shows on 5 continents. I've performed in theaters, comedy clubs, corporate events, charity events, private functions, and once each in an embassy and a barn.
An embassy.
And a barn.
In a bar.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you say you've been all over? You said you've been on 5 continents?
Yeah.
Like, can you name some of the countries you've been to that you've performed in?
South Africa, the UK, Ireland, Netherlands, obviously US, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, and I think that's it, unless I forgot to say Ireland.
Man, so you've been all over. Wow.
I was actually I toured Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand just before the pandemic. And when I got back, I said, I'm going to give myself a month to rest, and then I'm going to figure out where I'm going next. And now I have no idea. Because the countries I want to tour, they still have COVID, and it's going to still be a problem for a couple of years. So I'm going to have to wait.
And I have heard that. I can't name the country specifically, but they're still closed to outside people coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I've been vaccinated, but it doesn't mean I want to go to Vietnam or South Korea or Japan, places where people aren't vaccinated yet. And
now you say Vietnam, that was one of the countries I heard that was locked down. So,
yeah. Well, even if it's not locked down, it doesn't mean I feel safe going there until everybody there's vaccinated.
That's true. Well, I was ask Shaun, so many comedians out there. I mean, I'll tell you, even the classic comedians, from the 50s and the 60s, like just name some like Red Skelton and Lucille Ball and Sid Caesar. Did you have any influences or anybody that maybe kind of you admire along the way that maybe it was either an influence or just someone that you like from that?
It's interesting because you named 3 people and I don't think any of them are stand-up comedians. They're really sketch or
sitcom. Yeah, sitcom.
So that's I would say an actor is kind of the opposite of stand-up comedy. Because when you're an actor, you're being somebody else. And when you're a comic, unless you're playing a character, you're pretty much just an exaggerated version of yourself.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So if I had to pick somebody, I would say Robert Klein. But there's a lot of people who came before me that I think set good examples.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. But also,
I would have said Bill Cosby, but I think now you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, because the people ask, well, exactly what do you admire about him?
Not that he got away with crimes for a really long time.
Well, here's something that I've kind of watched with other stand-up comics, and I'd like to see if you can relate to this because I am not a comic. Because one thing I've learned about comics, you have to always be on point. Expect the unexpected. And what I'm getting at is hecklers, and I think hecklers are just completely disrespectful. I mean, the guy or the lady has got their set. They're trying to entertain. There's always one bad apple. And I'm amazed at some of the comedians I've seen that can just on the spot, I mean, tell them off in a heartbeat or make it funny, or even embarrass them. So can I ask, I mean, number one, have you had a heckler? Number 2, how do you think so fast to kind of get past that or try to continue with the show?
Well, I mean, yes, I can talk about this topic for an hour. Part of it, yes, everybody's had hecklers. I think it's horribly disrespectful. I also think that as a profession, long before I came along, we screwed up and allowed it. Because if you talk back to a Broadway play, they throw you out, no questions asked. You're gone.
Yeah,
but in a comedy club, instead of doing that, comedians sometimes made it part of the show. There are some of us who don't mind. Most of us really don't like it. It's interrupting. And I have a sort of an ongoing dispute with another comedian who puts heckler videos on YouTube. And I say, you're just encouraging more people to talk back.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we deal with it? Well, one is experience. So we get good at thinking of, quick responses. Secondly, we may be prepared because it's not the first time, if somebody interrupts. But we also learn there's a couple of different kinds of hecklers. They fit into categories. So the worst is a bachelorette party, because what you've got is a woman, she's getting married, she's surrounded by her best friends, they're all drinking, it's her night, she's the center of attention because it's her bachelorette party.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, they're all being told, shut up and listen to this guy. So, or a woman. So she'll get drunk and she wants attention, and that's a big problem. Sometimes it's somebody who's so drunk that they don't realize that it's not a conversation. And you can almost reason with them. You can say, what's your name? It's been nice talking to you. Now I have all these other people to talk to. So they don't mean to be bad. They just don't realize they're being bad. But sometimes it's a guy on a date, and he's annoyed because his date's laughing at somebody. So all of a sudden, he's not the most important person in our life. I mean, I think comedy club is a great place to go on a date, but not a first date. Because he wants to impress her, and all of a sudden there's this other guy impressing her. But here's what I noticed when I started out. If most comedians on stage are in jeans and sneakers and a t-shirt, that's more than half of us on stage. If you dress a little bit better, if you wear shoes instead of sneakers or boots, if you wear, even right now I'm wearing a polo shirt. I was in a t-shirt all day. You're wearing a dress shirt. I'm wearing a polo shirt. Just a polo shirt and jeans and shoes instead of sneakers and a t-shirt. You get more respect from the audience. It's sort of like now you're management and they take you more seriously, and they're much less likely to talk back to you. And normally on stage, I wear a sport jacket and it makes a difference.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know why, but it seems that, it's much less of a problem.
But of course, like I said, with hecklers, you got to really think fast. And see, I'm not a comedian because I can't think fast. Because by the time I think of a response, 5-10 minutes has already gone by. I'm like, you know what? I should have said that. And it's gone. So,
well, a lot of stand-up comedy, though, is sort of that later. So if something happens in my life and I thought this should have been my response, I can tell the story on stage and make that my response. I don't have to say I failed and then an hour later I thought I should have said this. I can just say I said that. But it's not only, it's not only hecklers. I did a show, an audition at a club, and the guy before me was so horribly offensive. He was racist, and the audience hated him.
Wow.
And when he got off stage and I got on stage, I could still feel the angry energy. And I took the microphone out of the stand and I just looked off stage where he was, and I just said, I'm not him. And that's all it took to remind the audience, hey, this is a different guy. You stop being angry at that guy. Don't be angry at this guy.
He's kind of broke the mold right there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, then, okay. I noticed that you do, I saw your website, you do, comic routines for businesses, corporate comedy.
Yeah.
What type of businesses that you perform for? All or just in particular one?
I can't think of a type I wouldn't perform for. So it's been a smattering of businesses in different industries. The only thing I will say is I won't perform at important family occasions like weddings. And because on the off chance that, Uncle Myron gets really drunk and starts insulting me, it's going to be my fault. And I'm going to hear you ruined the wedding. It's like, it wasn't me, it was Myron. But what am I supposed to do? Also, I only want to perform where people are paying attention, because comedy is not background music. So people have to be paying attention. So in a place where you don't have an attentive audience, it's a terrible place to perform.
So when I say type of business, like financial institutions, medical, just anything, any corporation.
I actually did a show for a medical group a couple of years ago, and I get there, and a big chunk of them are Indian Americans, and I look at the guy who hired me, who's Indian American, and I said, oh, I guess I'm not doing my Hindu joke. And he's like, what's the Hindu joke? So I tell him what the joke is, and he's like, oh, absolutely, I love that. You have to tell it. And I'm like, okay.
They were okay with it then. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, and here's the weird thing about comedy. A lot of times you're making fun of something and people think you're making fun of the topic rather than making fun of the problem.
Satire. I guess it's kind of like satire.
So if I'm doing a joke about I can't even think of an example, but people, if the topic makes people uncomfortable, they think you're making fun of the problem rather than you're making fun of the idea rather than making fun of the problem itself. They think you're making fun of the victim of the problem.
Sure. So I was going to ask you, have you ever been asked, you said you checked with a few people, hey, would this be okay? Would this be okay? Have you ever had the experience where maybe you went to a business and they specifically said, hey, don't bring up this topic or don't joke about this?
It really hasn't happened that way, but that was one of the rare times I would ever run a joke by a client before a show, because what you don't want is for them to say, okay, give me all your jokes and I'll cross out the ones I don't like. But
yeah, that's true.
I was doing a show at a synagogue in California, and I had a new joke where I was talking about, basically, I won't say it was a pro-drunk driving joke, because it wasn't a pro-drunk driving joke, but it was basically saying that at least they're not texting behind the wheel. So I'm preparing to do that, and an hour before the show, I'm meeting I think the rabbi and the president of the congregation. They said we could use some comic relief. It's a really sad day for us. This morning we found out that one of our congregants was killed in a motorcycle accident. I'm like, I guess I'm not doing my drunk driving joke.
Yeah.
You know, what you don't want is to do a joke where you even, let's say, mention the word cancer and you find out that the CEO's wife is suffering from cancer. But every joke has to have a topic, and you can't.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of one of those thin lines. Sometimes you gotta walk on a little bit.
Well, you don't know where the line is. That's the thing.
That's true. Yeah.
And even if you're talking about clean versus dirty or non-offensive versus offensive, the only way to know where the line is to come close enough that somebody thinks you crossed it. But here I'm even talking about not things that are offensive, but just things that might make people uncomfortable because of their own personal circumstance.
Again, and like you said, I mean, everyone's different. So what this person might find offensive, this person's like, what's wrong with that? So, it depends on the individual, I guess. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, everything is going to annoy somebody. You could be talking about stuffed animals and offend somebody.
One thing I'm interested in, Shaun, is that you mentioned that you've traveled on all the continents, and I think that's very interesting. So have you seen a difference? And what I mean a difference is from the audience that you would have here in America and to an audience member that's overseas. And if there is, what is that difference?
It's hard to know what the difference is, but I know sense of humor differs. So I have what I think you might call it like a New York Jewish sarcastic sense of humor. And a colleague of mine said there are places where people just don't get sarcasm. And just to give you an example, the first country I performed at outside of the U.S. was South Africa. And I thought, oh, not a big deal. It's a Western country. English is a language, there. Should not be a problem at all. And I have a joke where I say, I went on a date last night. The wine bar was full. So instead, I took her across the street to the thrift shop. So for the price of 2 glasses of wine and a cheese plate, I got her an end table, 2 lamps, and half an encyclopedia. A through L. I figure if we're still dating when she finishes it, I'll buy her the other half.
Yeah.
The joke goes on. It's silly. But they just looked at me like, it's not like they didn't think it was funny. It's like, where's the joke? It doesn't make any sense that you would go to a thrift shop on a date instead of a bar. Like, that's the point of the joke. It's stupid. As long as you're going to spend money, I might as well buy her something she can use instead of something that, disappears like that. But they just didn't get it.
Kind of went over their heads, I guess, right?
I wouldn't say over their head. It went around them. It's not their sense of humor. I have another joke where I talk about a Christmas letter. You get these from relatives sometimes, and they're all bragging. And then I go on to describe a letter that's way beyond bragging, overly exaggerating it. And they said to me, we don't get braggy letters here. And I realized they're mostly a poor country. People don't brag because people don't have anything to brag about.
Oh, that's true.
It's not a place where you go on Facebook and have somebody say, gee, look at my new BMW. Because that's not the way it is. People don't do that. In America, we brag. There, they don't. But, in South Africa or New Zealand, I didn't have that problem. In Australia, New Zealand, I didn't have that problem. In South Africa, I did. In Ireland, they loved everything I did. I felt like a king.
Really?
You never know.
That's awesome. Well, you mentioned earlier when we talked about comedy classes. comedy instruction. So what's your opinion overall of comedy classes? Recommended, not recommended, depends. What do you say?
I recommend them, and this is a perennial argument between comedians is somebody will say you can't teach people to be funny. And I would say the people who are against classes, almost exclusively that group is people who've never taken a comedy class. Because you can teach almost anything. You can make people, you can't make somebody funny any more than you can make somebody athletic. But you can certainly teach somebody how to swing a golf club. You know, they might not become a pro golfer, but you can certainly make them better. And in comedy, there's so many benefits of a comedy class, because comedians who are against classes will say, you have to go to an open mic night and fail and get on stage again and fail and do that until you fail less and then you get better. And I will say a class will help you learn some of the mistakes not to make. So you will learn a good teacher can teach you how to structure a joke. It can teach you how to use a microphone, how to use a mic stand. And you also learn in a supportive environment because everybody else in the class is just like you. So your first time on stage is really just in front of people in the class, much less scary than being in a comedy club. So absolutely, I would say if you're going to start, take a comedy class.
How long are these classes usually? I mean, is it a few weeks, a semester? I mean, I guess what's the length of these classes for the most part?
Almost all of them are the same. It's basically 8 classes of 2 to 3 hours. And the teacher will lecture, and then you come back the next week with a bunch of jokes you've written, and you perform it for the class, and the teacher will make suggestions, and the class will make suggestions, and maybe there'll be a session or 2 private with the instructor while you work on structuring jokes, and you just do that a few times. And then the graduation show is in a comedy club, usually, on a weeknight, or let's say 5:30 on a Saturday before the club has its regular shows. And you're in front of friends and family of everybody in the class. So it's a very supportive environment.
That's good. Glad to hear that. I was going to ask you too, I mentioned earlier, I didn't mean to get into that, but like sitcom stars and then versus, stand-up comics. Would you say, would you say the funniest comedians make the best, make the best comedians? Should I say the funniest people make the best comedians, should I say?
I think the funniest people make the best comedians. I don't know necessarily that the best comedians make the best sitcom actors, because it's a different skill. And if you, let's say you go to a show, you go to a TV show, and a lot of comedians take a lot of acting classes. I don't, but I'm not interested in being an actor. But if you look at like the first season of Everybody Loves Raymond or Seinfeld, I think you'll see that the stars are not as good as they are towards the end, because they got better. And there's a little bit of an animosity, because comedians think, oh, I'll get my sitcom and I'll get rich. And actors think, oh, look at all the comedians who got sitcoms. I'll become a comedian and I'll get a sitcom. And so actors don't want comedians acting, and comedians don't want actors clogging up stage time. So it's a little bit of an animosity, but not a lot.
Not a lot. Well, how do you come up with a joke, or how do you write a joke?
Basically, a joke is surprise. It's misdirection. My job is the same as a comedian, right? Same as a magician. They get you to look over here because the thing they're doing without, they don't want you to see is over here. It's just misdirection. And stand-up comedy is the same way. You think I'm going one way, and then the punchline is I went in a different direction. So that's basically what a joke is. How I come up with it, sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night. This is the weird thing I can't explain. I'll wake up in the middle of the night with a joke in my head, and I'll write it down, or if it's really strong, I'll put my glasses on and sit down at the computer and type it all out. And sometimes it's something that happened to me, and I realize if I change this, this, and this, now I have a comedy routine out of it. And sometimes I just see something funny. Sometimes stand-up comedy, especially like a late-night talk show monologue joke, is just taking 2 things and switching them around. But I think you have to have a warped sense of humor. You look at things sideways, and that's where a joke comes from.
Maybe taking like a serious topic, but making some kind of satire out of it. Find some kind of comic relief out of that.
Well, the way I came up with the joke I told about, the wine bar was full, so I took her to the thrift shop, is I was on a date. And we went to the wine bar. I didn't take her to the thrift shop, but I'm like, let's find, this place is full. let's find another bar. And we look, and the first place we come to is a thrift shop. Obviously, we're not going there on a date, but I thought, well, that would make sense. If they were open, we could go to the thrift shop. But, we kept walking, and we ended up going somewhere else on a date. But the idea of going to a thrift shop instead of a wine bar was in my head, and that's where the joke came from.
That takes talent. I mean, I applaud you big time for that.
Thanks. Well, listen, I think a sculptor, they asked a sculptor how he, sculpts something. And he says, oh, I'm sculpting. I wish I knew the quote, but he's like, if I'm sculpting a head, I look at the piece of stone and I chip away everything that's not part of the head. And it's sort of the same thing with the joke. You just, you chip away what doesn't belong, and what's left is the joke.
Another thing I've noticed when I was looking at your website, your profile, is you're doing what we say clean comedy.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to diss any other comedian out there. I know there's a lot of good, talented comedians out there, but the clean comedy is what I would call, you would minus the 4-letter words, even though we know what they are. So when you got into this field, Shaun, were you always the clean comedy? Did you just merge into that field, or how did that come about?
Well, 2 ways. One is, when I started, I took a comedy class, and the instructor, Steve Rosenfield, was very clear. He said, if you can be clean, because there's a lot. Nobody's ever going to not hire you because you're clean. Nobody's going to say, gee, you didn't curse enough, or you need to talk more about sex. So there are places you can work clean that you can't work dirty. If you want to do 5 minutes on the Tonight Show, it's got to be clean. Now they're letting people curse and they just bleep it, which I think is pretty cheap. I think they should just let people not. Either the FCC should let people curse on TV, or the show should say, just find a way to say the same joke without having a curse word we have to beep. But I think that it's a business decision. For one thing, is if you can work clean, half of the shows I do, I wouldn't be able to do if I weren't clean. And certainly corporate events, which are much more lucrative. If you're a comedy club comic, unless you're famous, you're generic, right? If they don't book you, they'll book somebody else. Not millions, there's thousands of us. But a corporate event or a charity fundraiser, they need a clean comic immediately. That knocks out 90% of my competition. But the other reason is I just don't tend to think of dirty jokes. Every once in a while, I think of a dirty joke and I write it down. I may tell my friends, but I never use it. But I just, that's not the way my mind works. I tend to not write a lot of jokes about sex.
I think a lot of people appreciate that. It's kind of a refreshing move. I mean, nothing, again, not dissing another comic.
No, of course, there's a lot of great dirty comics, and I appreciate it.
So, but I like your style too.
I have a joke where I say I beat the something out of somebody. And I will occasionally curse if I'm in a comedy club, and it doesn't matter. But I've tried, beat the blank out of somebody. You know what the word would be. And I've tried every other word in place of the 4-letter word. I've tried crap, stuffing, tar, daylights. I've tried every other word in its place, and it doesn't have the same impact. Just the joke works better with a curse word. But I see people who go on stage and they curse gratuitously, and there's just a lot of foul language for no reason. I'm like, it's extra words in your sentence.
Yeah, the comedy kind of, in my opinion, gets lost. And so
you want to get to the punchline sooner. The quicker you get to the punchline, the more punchlines you can stick in your set. And if somebody, every 5th word is F, that's 20% more words than you need.
So I'm going to ask you, I mean, I just, you do your comic set. Would you consider yourself as funny off stage as you are on stage?
Well, clearly nobody's as funny off stage as on stage, because on stage, it's the only thing you're there to be. But I think there are times I'm very funny off stage and times I'm not. It depends partly on the topic, what's the conversation about, and partly just my comfort level. If I'm with friends, it's a lot easier to be funny. If I'm with, if it's a more serious thing, or if I'm with people I don't know very well, it's a little more difficult. When I was a banker and I just started doing comedy, I think it might have been before I was doing stand-up, but I was selling jokes to Jay Leno. And at the bottom of page 2 of my resume, it said, other interests, freelance contributing writer to Jay Leno's monologue or something. And I'm there at 7:30 in the morning interviewing at a bank. And the guy goes through and, usual interview stuff. And he said, you seem to be a pretty serious guy. And I said, you obviously haven't gotten to the bottom of page 2 of my resume. And he said, I have. That's why I said it. And I'm like, it's 7:30 in the morning at a job interview. I don't know what he expected.
Oh, wow. I mean, the
And I
stories
didn't
you
get
could
the darn job.
tell.
And it was with the company that the guy who went on to found Amazon worked at.
Oh, wow.
So I could have been working with Jeff Bezos. Who knows? I might have been, the second richest man in the country.
You could have, well, maybe you'd be running the company. You never
Maybe,
know.
but they didn't hire me to work at the bank. So
That's true. Hey, I'm a former banker too, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Hey, on the comedy, when you do, when people come to hire you, do they? I mean, we talked about different businesses, but do you also do charities as well?
I do a lot of shows for charities. I do a lot of fundraisers for charities, for houses of worship, for cancer charities. A comedy night is a great fundraiser. So a lot of people contact me and say, can you put on a fundraiser for us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I heard a story. I saw an earlier interview.
It wasn't me, I swear.
But you told a funny story, and maybe you could kind of reiterate that here. Whereas it's kind of a funny story. You probably know. You obviously know it more than I do. Where I don't know the gist, but they expected you to do it for free, but you asked if the caterer was getting paid.
Oh, yeah.
What was the story on that? I like the story.
Well, this happens all the time. It happens to comedians. It happens to musicians where they think, oh, we like our job. It doesn't require any effort. We just show up and do it. So they think we should donate our services. And it's a problem because a lot of times the person we're talking to who wants to book us is a volunteer. Like it may be, a dentist or a teacher, and they're volunteering for their charity nights and weekends. And so they're not getting paid. So they think we should do it for free. And so they'll say, well, you can put on a fundraiser and you'll show up and you perform for free. And first of all, they usually want on a Saturday night, which is our biggest night. If it were a Tuesday, it would be a different story. But, I donate a lot of money to charity. But as far as performing for free, I think it sets a bad precedent in a lot of cases. So they'll say to me, well, we want you to perform for free at our fundraiser. And I say, are you serving food? And they say, yes, we're serving food. And I say, is the waitstaff getting paid? Of course the waitstaff's getting paid. That's what they do. And I'm like, is the chef getting paid? Of course the chef's getting paid. Is the farmer who grew the food getting paid? Yes. Is the janitor who's mopping the floor after the event getting paid? Yes. Is the electric company getting paid for the electricity? Yes. So I'm like, the point of the evening is a comedy show, but you're paying everybody except the comedian?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
So you get that a lot, then.
Yeah. And now I'm ready with that prepared speech to explain how ridiculous it is. But it's hard because I'm usually talking to a volunteer and they're like, well, I'm not getting paid. And I'm like, what do you do for a living? They're like, I'm a dentist. I'm like, I'm not a dentist. I'm a comedian.
Exactly.
And I have a friend, I belong to an organization, and I had a friend who said it was a not-for-profit organization. It was a sports team. So it wasn't a charity, but nobody was making any money from it. And a guy said, can you perform at our holiday party? Mm-hmm. And I said, what's the budget? And he got really upset. And I'm like, but we're serving food. People are paying for the food. The club's getting paid for the food. Why am I not getting paid to perform? And he said, well, you're one of us. And you'll do it for the exposure. What we really hate is to hear we're doing it for exposure. Because my answer to that is you already know who I am. I obviously don't need more exposure, but he was a realist and he was a lawyer. I said, will you handle the closing of my house for free? And he said, no. And I said, but you'll get exposure. You're going to meet two real estate brokers. You're going to meet the seller. You're going to meet the title person. You're going to meet the other attorney. You're going to get lots of exposure. And he said, okay, I get your point.
Got your point across then.
Yeah.
Well, here's I'd like to ask you this. Now, sometimes, you might do a set that, I don't know if you have a time limit. I'm just saying sometimes your set might be 15 minutes, sometimes maybe 30 minutes or however long. So do you write more jokes than what you think you might need? In other words, you have extra material out there, or how do you handle it on a time schedule, I guess?
Well, almost every show somebody does, there's a fixed time limit. And it may be 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on where you are. Comedy clubs are very strict about it because they have a bunch of comedians and they have to have the show end on time so they can, get everybody out, clean up, and set up for the next show. And the other issue in New York City comedy clubs is a comedian may have, 5 or 6 shows a night in different parts of town. And if you have an 8 o'clock spot in this club and you think you're done at 8:15, you got to be out of there at 8:15 because you got an 8:35 spot across town. And if the show's 10 minutes late, it screws up the whole city. So, but when you start out, usually you're doing 5-minute sets, and 5 minutes when you start out is a long time. It's like when you start running, a 2-mile run seems like it's really tough. And now to a runner, a marathon runner, 2 miles is a sprint. It's over in, 11 minutes or something. So when you start, filling the time is hard. And now I can do an hour and a half without thinking about it. But if you told me to do 2 minutes, and I had an audition at a club where they wanted 2 minutes, and I'm like, what do I have that's 2 minutes? Because I'm a storyteller. I've got to just think about what can I do that's 2 minutes that ends on, on a strong punchline. But 5 minutes, sometimes I have a 5 or 10 minute set in a comedy club, I'm not even thinking about what I'm going to talk about until I walk on stage. Usually it'll be a reaction to something the previous comic said or something that happened in the room. And if the previous comic was talking about shoes, I may have a joke about shoes and I'll just go up there and do that. Or if I can think of, it's called a callback. If the comedian was talking about a specific topic and I have a joke on that topic relating to what he said or she, the audience thinks it was spontaneous and it looks way better for them. But if I'm doing, a half hour or longer, I plan roughly what I'm going to say.
See,
but it's not like a play. A play, you know how long it takes to do a play.
Yeah.
Stand up, you never know. So I always budget for more. Like if I'm doing a half-hour set, I budget for a half hour, figuring there's going to be 0 laughs. And I may do 22 minutes worth of material in that half hour because there's laughter and I'm going more slowly. But I have a little vibrating timer that I put in my pocket. And depending on how long my closing joke is, I set it for that plus maybe 30 seconds. So if my closing joke is 5 minutes, I'll set the timer to go for 24:30, and then I'll finish whatever I'm saying and do my closing joke. And then I know I'm not going to run overtime.
I see. But you mentioned like big cities like New York City, and I'm just, all the big cities in America, for example, New York City, Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas, Seattle, Washington. If you're doing like several clubs or several comedy sets in the same city, do you I won't say to use the word script. You don't have a script per se, but do you change up the joke per place in the same city, or do you do the same set? How do you manage that?
Well, I have to back Dallas and Seattle out of the conversation because if you're at a comedy club in New York or LA, they're usually what's known as showcase clubs, which means you might have 5 or 10 comics in the show and they're working at different places. If you're in Dallas and you're working at the Dallas Comedy Club, you're only there. There's going to be usually 3 comics in a show, maybe 4. You're only working at that club that night. So you may have 3 shows, but you're not going anywhere else. But in terms of what I do, there are some comics who will do the exact same set. There are some comics who will vary it. The hard part with varying it, especially if you're doing more than one show in the same club, is you can get lost. So there's a club I did 6 shows in one night. They had 2 showrooms and they would alternate. They'd start one show at 7:30, the next room would start at 8:30, then the 7:30 show would let out and they'd have a 9:30 show. So they'd have 6 shows in a night and you might do all 6. And if I did the same material, there'd be no problem. But if I sort of skipped around, I'd be like, I don't remember if I did this joke in front of this audience because I was in the same room 2 hours ago. So I remember once saying, hey, did I tell you about my dad? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you about my dad. And then I started talking about my parents because I'd forgotten whether I'd done that before.
I see. I was wondering how you juggled that. I mean, from place to place. So
the other thing you can do is if you have, let's say you're doing 4 shows and you have an hour and a half's worth of material and you're doing 4 20-minute shows, you do the first 20 minutes, then you do the next 20 minutes, then you do the next 20 minutes. If you do it in order, that's easy. But if you're like me and you tend to skip around, that's different. During the pandemic, I've been trying to put my jokes in an order, so I do them in the same order all the time, but it's complicated.
I'm sure. Wow,
every time I rehearse at home, almost every time I rehearse, I leave something out. And the audience doesn't know it, but I finish and I look down my set list and I'm like, oh, that's the one I left out tonight. Last night I left out this other one.
But, the audience would never know. I mean, they're still be roaring with laughter regardless. So
the only time I ever had an issue with that, aside from did I tell you about my dad, is I was doing a show. My father passed away, and my mother said, I know comedy is important to you. When we pass away, we don't want you to miss any work. So the day I buried we buried my father. I'm Jewish. With the funeral and the burial happened within a couple of days of the death. And then you do its own sitting shiva, which is like a wake after the funeral where people come visit. It's in the house. People come visit. They bring food and you mourn or tell stories or whatever. So I think my father died on a Thursday, and we had the funeral. I don't remember the days, but like we had the funeral on a Sunday, and we buried him. And then I start telling a joke on stage that night, and I was fine, except I was halfway through the joke, and I realized the joke I'm telling is about burying a body. And as I'm telling this joke, I realize I'm telling a joke about burying a body on the day I buried my father. And that threw me off a little bit. And
I can imagine.
I went through the joke fine, and then later I realized I was repeating a setup that I told like a minute earlier. But in my head, I came up with, even though it was the same setup and the audience was looking at me funny, I came up with a different punchline, and it worked out. So it made it sound like it was planned, but I just got really lucky.
Again, you have to think fast on your feet, or in your mind, I guess you could say, So,
practice.
Well, if you don't mind, Shaun, I'd like to show my audience. I'm going to go to your website, which, again, I'm going to post this, and you've got it there on your...
There's it right there, brainchampagne.com.
And ladies and gentlemen, I got to say, this guy's very, very funny. So let me give you just a little taste of his website. And I think this segment has to do with doctors. And I thought that one was really, really good. So let me see if I can pull that up really quick. Let's see.
You're testing your technology abilities here.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. And I'm not. Let's see. I don't think I'm doing a very good job right now. So let's see. And let's see. Yeah. Can you see that or no?
Yeah, but you're going to have to zoom. You have to obviously blow up.
Oh, sure. Here it goes.
Yeah.
Here we go.
We can see it. We can't hear it.
Can't hear it. Well, that's the comedy. I mean,
your way. I can do it. I could try it here, but I'm not sure how I would do it.
Yeah, there's a share there, but I didn't know you couldn't hear it. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, let me. I can do it in the comment section, so let me just type that in to the section, and I also put that in the comment section too. So it's brainchampagne.com. So just kind of tell us about your website then, Shaun, just for those, what do they expect to see when they log in?
All right. Well, the first question people get is, why did you call it Brain Champagne and not ShaunEli.com? And actually, if you go to ShaunEli.com, it goes to that website. But when I started in comedy, a URL cost $50. $50 a year, and there's 3 spellings of Shaun, and people might not spell Eli right. And if I did all the permutations, all of a sudden that was $300. And I'm like, I don't want to spend $300. And I also wanted something memorable. And because people, I learned, this is a lesson I learned, say your name a lot when you're on stage so people remember it. And if you have a joke about your name, that's even better. But I wanted a memorable URL. And I like champagne, and I think stand-up comedy, or comedy in general, is sort of like champagne for the brain. So I thought Brain Champagne, it rhymes. And I've had people come up to me and say, oh, you're Brain Champagne. And I say, well, that's my website. It's not my name. My name's Shaun, but that's my website, and people remember it. So if you go to my website, there's a few things you'll find. I think there's 6 videos. There's 6 stand-up videos, short, a minute or 2. There's 3 other videos, which are sort of the kind of thing you'd see on a late-night TV show as sort of sketches. There's also 50,000 words worth of jokes on my website. And to give you an idea what 50,000 words is, an average novel is less than 100,000 words. So 50,000 words is about half a novel's worth of jokes. So you could spend a lot of time. And I recommend doing this at work on company time instead of your own time.
It's safe for work too, right?
Yeah. Unless you're, by the way, unless you're an air traffic controller. If you're an air traffic controller or a truck driver or a surgeon, don't be watching videos or
Uber driver or what?
You know what? If you're an Uber pool driver, go right ahead.
So is this also the website that could go like if a corporate person or somebody wants to hire you?
Yes. I have to say, I've been on a couple of websites where I can't easily find the contact information. And that's just bad business. So yes, you can absolutely contact me through the website. There's a phone number. My phone number is 914-IT'S-FUNNY. So easy phone number to remember.
That's awesome. I appreciate that because, I've had corporate events too. And, not all of them, but a lot of corporate events we're all just sitting there. When will this be over? But they usually have, a comic or somebody, special interest that'll kind of liven things up. While we're on the subject then, Shaun, do most of the time when you're hired for these corporate events, do they have you at the beginning, at the end, somewhere in the middle?
No, not at the beginning. No, I've had people say, we want you to be there at 9:00 in the morning to start the event. I'm like, no, don't do that. I don't know why, but it's so much harder to make people laugh early in the morning. Late at night, people laugh more. So
loosened up.
Yeah. So typically what they'll have is they'll have a dinner and then they'll have maybe an award ceremony of some sort, depending on the event, and then a comedian. And sometimes it's late, they have me on at 10:30 at night and everybody's like, I want to go home. I don't want to listen to this guy. So sometimes it's tough. Corporate events are sometimes tough, but when it goes well, it's great.
I was wondering about that because the ones I remember that we had, we would do our set, or they'd have the speaker, the president of the company would give his profits and losses and things going on, but we'd always have somebody at the very end that kind of loosen up everybody, so well, that's good.
There's a lot of studies, and there's a page on my website that has all this information, has links to studies about all the benefits of having comedy at a corporate event, and people remember better when they laugh. So if you have whatever knowledge you're imparting to people all day, and then you have a comedian, people will remember the material better. And people have fond memories and want to come back next year if it's a conference, if they had fun at the conference. But I have to say, I definitely don't want to perform during a meal. I really want them to finish the meal, have them clean up, and then have the show. And I did a show at a synagogue a couple of years ago. And I said, my contract says have the meal, clean up, and then have the show. And they said, no, we want the meal after the show. And they insisted. And I said, okay, whatever. And what I didn't realize is they were going to set the buffet up next to the stage. And I think I'm doing an hour, and about 40 minutes in, everybody's looking at the food and, getting distracted because they're hungry. So I had to address the elephant in the room. And I said, I'm very fortunate in my career. I've worked with some great comedians. I've worked with Robert Klein and Jerry Seinfeld and Jim Gaffigan.
Wow.
But this is my first time ever opening for coleslaw. And then a guy in the back yells, it's potato salad.
Always one.
Yeah, I went on to explain that coleslaw was funnier.
When you do a corporate event, let's just say whether or not the business is, say, as a bank or it's a medical supply company, or do you do your jokes? Do you revolve around that company, whatever, like what they do there? Like if it's a medical, you do medical jokes. If it's a bank, you do banking jokes.
Well, you hit two things that I have jokes on, so those are easy. Yes, I have jokes about medicine and I have jokes about banks. It really depends. But here's the thing comedians have learned. They want the jokes to be all about them, and that's impossible because, it's not like I'm going to have medical supply house jokes and be able to write a half hour on medical supplies and then test the jokes out and fine tune them and hone them because I got nowhere to practice them. But if you start out with one joke about the people, the people in the room or what you're doing there, and then towards the end, you have another joke. Doesn't have to be your closing joke, but another joke about that. They leave thinking, oh my God, that whole show is about us. They forget about everything else. Which makes that a lot easier. Also, I was booked to do a show for a dental group, and they canceled, and I'd written a couple of dentist jokes. And I'm like, and then I was booked to do a show for a group of psychologists, and I'm like, I could just tweak the jokes, and they work just the same.
And they worked. Yeah,
it was fun.
You just kind of what would you call that? Recycling?
Yeah, essentially, it was restructuring the jokes to make it for psychologists, and it was fine.
Well, that is awesome. Well, again, I like your website. I've seen it, and I would like to see you live sometime myself. So,
can you book me to come to Texas?
I'll see what I can do, but you're not going to work for free, and I don't expect you to. Maybe I can talk to my company.
What is your company?
I work for a corporation. We'll take it offline, and I'll tell you after the show. But yeah, they are.
If it's the dental supply company, I got the jokes.
Okay, not quite dental, but yeah, I mean that's something to think about. I mean, I could bring this over to my management exactly because they are a worldwide company, so not something that I might want to keep in mind. So after the show, kind of stay online and we can discuss that. So
that'd be great.
Well, Mr. Eli, I don't have anything else. I mean, you've kind of answered all my questions, and you've really got me more intrigued, into kind of the comedy and kind of what goes into it. And so, but now I was in my show with this, with anybody's profession, anybody's hobby or special interest. There may be somebody watching this either live right now or later on when this show is archived, and they're thinking, he or she's thinking, I think I've got what it takes to be a comedian. I'd like to do that. I'm really interested. I think I have a natural talent, and they don't know how, why, where to get started. So what would be your advice to that individual?
If they're in a city with a comedy club,
and what was that again?
If they're in a city that has a comedy club,
okay.
So if they're in Dallas or Seattle or New York or LA or any reasonably major city, call the comedy club and ask if they have a comedy class. Okay. And if they have a comedy class, take the class. If they don't, you can always go to a city. There are some places that'll do a 1 week intensive comedy class in lieu of being the same place for 8 weeks. So that's doable. If not, you've just got to write some jokes, go to an open mic night, tell your jokes. You're going to fail. Nobody's good at anything the first, 100 times they do it.
Sure.
You're going to go to an open mic night, do the best you can. You may leave crying. You go back the next week and you're going to be crying less, and you'll realize, and videotape your show, videotape your set, and watch it and realize what you did right and what you did wrong, and just keep doing that over and over again until you're better.
And of course, got to prepare. You might get heckled, or they might get heckled too. So you got to be prepared.
And then quit because I don't want the competition.
That's right.
So quit before you get good, please.
Yeah, you won't compare to Shaun Eli. You'll never be as good as him, right?
I think a lot of people will be as good as I am.
Okay. Well, Shaun, that's really all I had. I mean, with your impressive resume, I'm very glad you took some time out for my show so we could learn more about you and just talk to us more about your profession. So I'm really honored and humbled that you.
I appreciate it. I'm very happy to talk about what I love. Very easy to do.
Okay. And again, ladies and gentlemen, as you see on his name tag there, it's www.brainchampagne.com. I highly encourage you to look at it. He's got some clips there, and I promise you can hear it, unlike what I did earlier. So there is actually sound. You don't have to read lips on that. So,
and I hope that there was no sound when you did it, because I couldn't hear it. Maybe it came through to everybody but me, and then I look like an idiot.
Well, no, I couldn't hear it either. So, I've been doing this show now for 2 months. So there's my first snafu in a while. So
that's pretty good then, if it's the first one. I'm proud to be part of your first screw up.
Okay. Oh, well, there's a compliment in there somewhere.
Somewhere.
Well, again, Shaun, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you live sometime, and we'll discuss that too.
All right. I'll see you.
Have a great evening.
You too.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this episode of the Van Buren Variety Show. I'm so glad that you're here tonight. We've got a great guest, learned more about comedy than I'd known. So look forward to seeing this guy more and more. So again, reminder, my live show is every Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Central Time and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So again, it's always a grab bag of entertainment, new guest, new topic, could be a hobby, a profession. I have some musical guests maybe coming up pretty soon. So make sure you tune in for that. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, because this show may be expanding more than just on Tuesday nights only. So if you hit like and subscribe, you'll get my notifications of any upcoming shows during the week. So hope you do that. Again, this is Bob Van Buren for the Van Buren Variety Show. I'm certainly glad you're here, and I hope you have a great evening, everyone. Good night.